Good afternoon. My name is Maggie Rivas Rodriguez. Today is July 30th, 2018. We are in Los Angeles, California, interviewing Cy Abrego for the Voces Oral History Project. Thank you again, Cy, for allowing us to be here.
My pleasure, and good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Please know, before we start, that if there's anything you don't want to discuss, you are under no obligation to discuss it. If there are things that you do want to discuss, and I'm not bringing up a question about it, it's your prerogative to bring it up. If at any time you need to stop to use facilities or to get a drink of water, that's totally okay. And as I told you earlier, the raw tape of this interview will be housed at the Nettie Lee Benson Latin American Collection. So thank you so much for allowing us to interview you. So what we're going to be talking about today is your experience in the military during the Vietnam War era, but also your civic and political engagement after the war and how that evolved. So I'd like to start off a little bit with growing up. You grew up in the Chino Pomona area of California?
Yes, that's true.
So what brought your family to that area?
Well, my dad was a farm worker out in the Coachella Indio area. And actually, a lot of my siblings were born in Indio. At that time, it was a lot of agriculture work, and he happened to work on a dairy farm. And after the war ended, World War II ended, he was able to get a job at the airport in Chino, which was a big promotion for us. So that's how we ended up moving to Chino, California. And we lived there, and actually my early years of education from, I'd say, the second grade on to sixth grade was there in Chino, public schools.
So about what year would that have been that y'all moved to Chino?
Oh, it had to be around probably around 46, 47, right after the war ended.
Do you remember that period when your father was a farm worker?
Yes, I do. I do. We had horses. We had cattle. It was fun. It was very, very exciting and fun living in a farm at a ranch. And but it was hard during those times.
How was it hard? How was that hard?
Well, it was hard in that there's 9 of us in the family, nine siblings, trying to maintain a household for 9 children, feeding us. There was a lot of floods in that time in the Coachella Valley area. The hard work of taking care of the cows, the cattle, and also trying to maintain our education because there wasn't a school nearby. We had to be picked up on buses and transported to our school.
So 2 questions. Did your siblings work with your father?
Yes, my older brother and older sisters worked with my father, and they contributed. During the summers, of course, we used to go up north, and we would pick grapes. So we were summer migrant farm workers. Every summer we spent either picking grapes, plums, string beans, peaches, whatever we could find in the summer. That was a way to supplement our income and a way to pay for our school clothes and textbooks and so forth. So yes, every summer we'd travel up north. My dad would put up a big tent, and most of the time it was in some grower's ranch, and that's where we lived for 2 or 3 months.
Were there a lot of other families that were doing the same thing?
Oh yeah, I mean there are a lot of people from our area, a lot of Latinos from our area. That was just a part of the way of life. It was our way of life, and everybody supplemented their income and by going out and picking crops.
So you were too small to help with that?
Well, no, actually, from 5 until I was in high school, we did that, and oftentimes I was left alone because the family would come back to go to school. I'll tell you a story if we have the time. one of the stories was when you returned from summer vacation to schools was a show and tell. And all the kids would get up and say, well, we went to Europe.
Yeah.
We had a great vacation.
Wait, one second, because the backdrop is a
Oh.
little bit. You were telling me about, I think, working in the fields. And you
Yeah, so at the end of each school year, we automatically would head on out to up north to pick crops, and we would return at the beginning of school or after school. But what was embarrassing for me was, as a youngster, it was a tradition, I guess, in schools to have at the beginning of each school year for the children to get up and talk about what they did for the summer. And most of the students that I went to school with would talk about, well, our family went to Europe and we had a great vacation. Or the other kids would say, well, we spent 2 weeks in Hawaii. And so the last thing I wanted to do was to get up there and say, yeah, I spent my summer picking grapes. So I would make up the stories that we were up in Fresno, California, which is a grape capital of the world. Oh, and we went to the river camping, and we went fishing. But all the time was just to hide the fact that we were farm workers and picking crops. Because it was at that age, it was embarrassing for us to be doing that, because the way that people reflected on our ethnicity it really gave us a big complex in those early days.
So, where north did you go?
Pardon me, we went to Selma, Santa Rosa, of course Fresno, San Jose. We used to pick string beans next to the Air Force Base. And then here in Southern California, we would pick grapes in Cucamonga, wine grapes. We would pick apricots in Hemet, California. And we would pick potatoes and corn in Chino. And so that was our, when you have a large family with us and we're all crop pickers, I mean, that's the way we used to make money. Now, when we used to go to Fresno or Selma to pick Thompson seedless grapes, those are the ones that they make the raisins from. You pick them, you put them in a tray. They dry out, and then my parents would come back, return back to the city, to Chino, and then I would remain, because you'd have to turn the trays over so that the other side dry, and so that they become raisins. So oftentimes as a young kid, 12, 13, 14 years old, I was left alone at camp and stay there with the other workers to turn the grapes over so that they could dry on the other side. So I would normally report to school about 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the school. That was our practice for a year, and all the way up through high school.
So in your, if you're the only one in your family that would stay behind to flip the
I was the only one in the family, yeah, because my brother at that time, my older brother, and had a job that he would come to, and my sister as well. So I was the only one that would stay behind. We were lonely, but it had to be done.
I would think it would be very difficult for your parents to leave you behind.
Well, they did, and it was just a routine kind of thing. I mean, it was a goodbye, and they'd return, and I would stay.
Who would you stay with?
I would stay by myself, but there were other campers. Don't forget, there was a lot of people used to do that at that time. So, I mean, it was like a small community of families that would get there. So I wouldn't be the only boy staying behind. There'd be other boys. A couple of times, my cousin stayed with me. And so it was family, and we had to, make our breakfast, cook, make our lunch, and so forth. So,
can you remember any anecdotes about those years that kind of helped shape your thinking about what that was like and the experience that was?
I think my whole experience of growing up the way I did helped shape what I am today, because it influenced what I wanted to do as an individual I always perceived, and I always had dreams as a kid that I wanted to become someone, that I wanted to help our community. I didn't like the way we lived because TV at that time, the shows that we had, the Beaver, Leave It to Beaver, and Ozzie and Harriet, and Ricky Nelson, all those television shows reflected a better life. And so they had a lot of influence on me. But there was no way for us to get there. How do we get there? And I had this desire and motivation as growing up as a kid that someday I wanted to be able to do something significant in helping our community. So absolutely, the way I grew up, the neighborhood I grew up in, even to this day, the friends that I grew up in, we still stay in touch. And so all that influenced my choices in life. And it also served to inspire me and motivate me to do more than what I thought I could do at the time.
So if you were one of the few students in your schools that was going on these fields, is that right?
Yes.
Was there a very small population of
Yes.
Mexican Americans?
Yes.
How did you all end up there?
In the school?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it so happened that the projects that I lived in, the school was our neighborhood school. And so that's the only reason why I went to the school. Is, at that time you live in a certain neighborhood and certain schools are there, and that's what you attend. The majority of the student population at that time was, it was all white. The majority of the students were white. Very few Mexicans at that school.
So tell me about the housing project. So what is the name of the housing project?
Riverside. It was what? It was on Riverside Street. So it had it was a Riverside housing project. That's all I remember it there in Chino.
In Chino?
Mm-hmm.
So there, the housing project?
It was within walking distance of the school.
Was it mostly Mexican Americans that lived there?
Mostly Mexican Americans and poor whites.
And poor whites that lived in the housing project, and then you go to school, and it was mostly white kids?
White kids. Because the neighborhood around the school, except for our housing project, was middle class.
So it sounds like you started to see a difference between a race difference and maybe a class difference at that point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, at that time, we were, look, let's go back a little bit. My parents attended segregated schools. My dad has a 2-year education. My mom had a 6th grade. She went to a segregated school in Ontario. And so the public pools were not available for Mexicans unless it was on cleaning day. So we had that kind of complex. The stereotypes that we had at that time in television, the Mexican with a big sombrero, the zarape, taking a siesta, all those stereotypes helped to really diminish our self-concept. And so we started believing that we were lazy and would not accomplish anything. So all those stereotypes, on TV, on advertisement, really hurt and really served, for me, it served to motivate me to say, I want to break from these things. And so that's the time I became a strong advocate for students. And that's how I got involved in my college years and trying to provide access for students. And so, yeah, absolutely had a lot of influence.
Did it make you angry, the what you saw in the media? The stereotypes about Mexicans, did it make you mad?
Well, I don't know if it made me mad, but it sure hurt my self-esteem. And the names that they would call us, greasers, beaners. We took pride in some things, too. For example, I remember going to school in the 6th grade, and everybody had their lunch pails. And we would take our burritos on brown paper bags, todos mantecosos on the outside. But that was our lunch. That's 9 children. My mom used to make breakfast burritos and lunch burritos, and that's what we used to eat. And so what would hurt would be the names, I think. But no, I wasn't. I wouldn't get angry. I wouldn't start fighting with anybody. But yeah, I remember those names. They were hurtful.
So when you had your lunch, your bean burritos, did you eat them open? Because a lot of people we've interviewed.
I ate them
like-
open.
Yeah, because a lot of people would hide to.
You know, I ate them open.
So that was kind of a defiant. That was a form of resistance, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was. I wasn't intimidated, although the names were hurtful things I didn't hide. I was what I was, and that was it.
Did you ever talk to your parents about discrimination against Mexican Americans?
I think we all did. Not only in our family, but some of the other neighborhood kids of my age. We all know what was going on because that's how we formulated cliques. That's how we formulated our self-support networks. That's how in school grounds you would find the Mexicans all in one area, and then the non-Mexicans playing around, doing whatever they needed to do. But that's how you started that's how you formulated the cliques. And I wouldn't put it past it that was the beginning of the formulation of gangs, because we started socializing among and between us. That was our group. And so all through high school, elementary, junior high school, and high school, the same clique.
Did you speak Spanish when you were in school growing up?
Well, I did, but not in the school grounds, because at that time, and I would say the 1950s, early 50s, in Chino and in Pomona, teachers would get a ruler and strike your on the hand. So there was no way, no Spanish could be spoken on the school grounds. So we learned pretty quickly to keep that to ourselves and make sure that when we did speak, there was no one else around to report us. But you were not allowed to speak Spanish in the school grounds.
When you went into school, did you speak English already?
Yes. I spoke English and Spanish.
Do you remember any teachers that either were very supportive of you and seemed to be sympathetic to the Mexican American kids, or otherwise?
It's an interesting question, because I don't remember any of that in grades from kindergarten to sixth grade. After sixth grade, we moved to Pomona. And I was in this English class, seventh grade. Hardly had any background in reading or writing or any of those, being successful in any of those subjects. But the English teacher would call on me to read in front of the class. And she kept doing that, and she was most helpful for me. For some reason, she took a liking to me, and she really spent time with me, and to the point where I felt comfortable reading to the whole class, and I felt that I had achieved something, that I was something special. Mrs. Palmer.
Do you remember her first name?
No, I don't.
And what school was that at?
That was in Freeman Junior High School in Pomona. Yeah, that was a start in the beginning of getting some confidence in my education. I had been a horrible student.
Why do you suppose that was, that you were a horrible student?
Because I didn't understand, because of the background of Spanish, English, being an introvert, because most of us were introverts at that time, being ignored in the classroom, never being called on. Being able to succeed was really, really difficult to be one of those top students at that time. You were ignored. We were ignored most of the time. We were stereotyping to saying that we were not going to amount to anything but the labor force. So very little energy and resources were spent on us.
So at this school, at Fremont Junior High School, were there more Mexicanos?
Yes. Every school that I went to, there was a handful of Mexican Americans, and we all hung around together. That was our support network.
So when you were when you started going, you started to get a little bit more self-confident. Did you think about what the future might be? Did you start thinking about what that might look like?
I would daydream a lot, and I would have a lot of dreams. How the future would be formulated, I never had a plan or some strategic goals on it, but I would dream a lot, and especially daydream.
So tell me about that. Give me a picture of when you were daydreaming and what you would be daydreaming about.
Well, I was most of the time I would daydream that someday I would become a teacher. Sometime a musician. Sometime a politician. In high school, I finally formulated a goal that I wanted to become a lawyer. So those were the things. But dreaming and reality were two different things. Because at that time, especially in high school, Latinos were tracked. And I'm talking about here in Pomona, in Ganesha, so it's not a hidden thing. But they used to track us into the vocational courses, metal shop, wood shop, drafting, all those, and the girls were tracked into home economics, cooking, sewing, typing, and so forth. So my dreams never matched the preparation. And so I would just continue to daydream and so forth. So they never served to come together.
So when you were daydreaming, where would you be when you're daydreaming?
I could be in class. Most of the time in class, my mind would wander off. I would do it at home. I would do it if I was at a function that I felt uncomfortable, whether it was an assembly or something like that. So, the daydreaming, I think, really helped to occupy my mind when I was feeling low, and it made me feel good.
Did you ever talk to your parents about your dreams?
Oh yeah, but my parents were the second grade. They never talked to us about higher education. They didn't have the background. And all they saw for us was a future in working. I'll tell you what, if it hadn't been for my parents and teaching me the value of hard work, I don't think I would have been able to survive. And in those days, you could get motivated real quick if a shoe is being thrown at you or a branch is cut off and whoop. Of course, you go to jail nowadays if you do that. But they taught us the value of hard work, and I'm glad I was able to teach it to my sons.
Did they talk to you about your grades?
They never did. I was a C average student. I was not in the top 1/3. C's and passing was good enough for us at that time. Even D's in a couple of subject matters. Barely passing, but passing. Our futures were planned. You're going to get your diploma and you're going to go to work. You're not going to college. You're either going to be a mechanic, you're not a construction worker. Those were I knew for sure that I wasn't going to be a grape picker.
Because?
Because it's hard work. There's no way I wanted to spend my life out there in the sun. And I had aspirations for other things. I just didn't know how to get there. There was no way I was going to get to college with my grades after high school. No one talked to us at school. No counselor. Nobody talked to us about college. I'm reminded about this story of former Secretary of Labor Hilda Solis. Because at that time, I'm not the only one that went through this experience. All the Mexican Americans at that particular time period in life were going through the same thing. So former secretary and now current supervisor of LA, Hilda Solis, says that her counselor told her, oh, don't plan on going to college. You're only going to amount to be a secretary. So don't worry about college. Take these courses, typing. And she said she did reach her goal. She became the Secretary of Labor. And so what happens to us is that in those times we were not encouraged to even think about college. 2 weeks or 3 weeks, actually 2 weeks after graduation from high school, we were in the service. We enlisted in the Army. I was 17. I got my dad's permission to enlist. That was our future at that time. Either the military or the workforce as a laborer. And I enlisted with 4 other buddies, and we all went into the service.
What did you think was going to come of that?
The military was a way to get away from the Pomona. It was a way to get away from the rut. It was something to look forward to, a different future than from working. That was for us to do something, to take credit for doing something besides saying that we were failures. So we joined the military.
And you went into the Army?
I went into the Army.
Why the Army?
Because they had they had this program called the enlist under the buddy system. And so there were 4 of us. But that buddy system never developed because after basic training, I didn't see them until after we returned from service, 3 years later.
What were the names of your buddies?
Art Flores, he's still around. Pájaro, we used to call him. Julio Espinosa. Chato, we used to call him. And Ernie Vallejo. We used to call him VD.
VD, V-I-D-I?
Yeah, VD, just the capital letters VD.
Oh. So did you feel like you had been kind of bait and switched?
In the Army?
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, after basic training, we hung around together at basic training. You know, we slept in the same barracks, did the marches, rifle training, all that stuff. But they got shipped out to different directions, and so did I. I'll tell you this story now that it comes to think of it. This might have been the cause of me changing. When I was in high school, and then you know what? It was so helpful. I got to tell you this story because it made a big difference in my life. When I was in high school, and I had already taken all the shop courses, you know, the drafting, the wood shop, the metal shop, the auto shop, everything. And then the counselor says, well, you still need one more class to graduate. The only course that you have available, well, your option is home economics or typing. Well, I wasn't going to go wear an apron. And so I chose typing. And so when I graduated, and I was in Fort Ord, and we're all out there in a company, we're together in line. The sergeant asked, who knows how to type? And I raised my hand. And since that time, it changed my life. I no longer had the KP. I never had to be out there with the infantry. I was always inside an air-conditioned office typing. And so I made out for that skill in typing.
So to go back just a little bit, when you were in high school, did you belong to any organizations or do any activities?
Yes. Well, as I mentioned to you, Mrs. Palmer, who had a lot of influence in me in the 7th grade, In high school, we had Mr. Barraza. We started, this is now, you're talking about the 1960s, early 60s, 61, 62. And Mr. Barraza was the only Mexican teacher, a history teacher in the school. We started an organization called MAYO, Mexican American Youth Organization. There must have been, of the 1,000 students there at Ganisha High School, there must have been maybe 30 of us. And Mr. Barraza was our advisor. I was the vice president and became president of MAYO. And we used to collect food, for on Christmas. We used to volunteer and go paint homes in the barrio for the neighborhoods in Sherryville and Sharkyville. Those were the barrios in Pomona. I was part of the 12th Street barrio in Pomona. And so we used to do a lot of that community type of service, but we were small. We were a small group of people, but it was our support network. One of the most compelling experiences that I had was that every organization in high school at the beginning of each week was allowed, the president of each organization, 4-H, I forgot some of the other, Rotary and some other clubs, were allowed to go give the Pledge of Allegiance of the flag to the whole school over the school speaker, but not the president of the MAYO organization. And Mr. Barraza, year in and year out, tried to get the president to have that opportunity. And finally, he was allowed to invite the president of the MAYO organization to give the Pledge of Allegiance, and it happened to be me. So for me to recite the Pledge of Allegiance was a big thing. So afterwards, and I'm walking through the hallways, and the Latino students, "Órale, sign." They gave me the high sign. So that was a big moment.
So can you just paint a picture? Was that in front of the whole school in the assembly?
Oh no, it was not assembly. You just go up there to the flagpole. They would have the microphone there, and you just give the Pledge of Allegiance, no audience, and it would be through the speakers in the classrooms. It would be sent to all the speakers.
What did that signify for you?
Finally, I had one step inside the mainstream. After that, as a matter of fact, I got invited to go speak to the Rotary Club luncheon. And I didn't have a suit. Mr. Barraza lent me one of his. And so that was the beginning again, some things that could happen. You work hard, things will happen. And so that's some of the experiences that I had in high school.
Mr. Barraza sounds like a pretty amazing person.
Yeah, he passed on. Last time I saw him, he was in Santa Ana College. He left high school and went to become a counselor at Santa Ana College. But yeah, he used to invite us to his home, and we talk about. He was very involved in the LULAC organization, so he had background and information and would try to educate us, because we were barrio kids. I mean, we don't know anything about what's going on with the Latino community, other than just what's going on with our own community. And so he provided a lot of exposure for us.
So in the high school, there was at least one person who thought that you might be able to do something more than...
Yes.
Did he ever talk to you about that?
Yes, he talked about, he's the only one that talked to us, encouraged us to go on beyond high school, to go on to college. A lot of us didn't think we had the potential.
Did you think
we had been conditioned? Absolutely. There's no way I had the potential. There's no way I would have been able to go straight into college. If it wasn't for the Army, I would probably never. I didn't start college until I was 22 years old, when I got out of the Army. And at that time, they had to take me. Veterans got in. And so I was able to start, and I started at community college. And I started in a field that's all I knew, machine shop. That's how I got to Mount Sac. started a machine shop. And there's another example, Mr. Clark. To be a machinist, I wanted to be a machinist because I wanted to work indoors. I no longer wanted to be out in the field. But to be a machinist, you need to know trigonometry, the angles, because that's what you're going to be cutting, and steel and shapes and stuff like that. I only had consumer math in high school, so I had no idea what trig was. But after a couple of weeks in his class, he pulled me aside and he says, I want you to come a couple hours before class. And he used to tutor me in trig. And then he made me foreman of the class. So I became the foreman of the class. And if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't have then transferred over to Santa Ana College, earned by a degree in machine technology. And then I already knew I was going to go to a 4-year college to become a teacher in woodshop because of Mr. Clark, who had faith in me. So there are people that you meet along the way that serve to inspire you.
So did you ever tell Mr. Clark and Mr. Barraza about their influence?
Oh, they knew that I had even earned my doctorate degree, absolutely.
Very cool.
So I went from barely graduating high school to earning a doctorate in USC, and I was able to talk to Mr. Barraza, and he was very proud, and Mr. Clark as well.
So you joined with your buddies under the buddy system, go into the Army, and you end up in Japan.
No. Okinawa.
Okinawa. So had that been the first time that you had been out of California?
No. After Fort Ord, this is another, I've had some intriguing experiences that really developed me as an individual. After Fort Ord, I went to Fort Benjamin Harrison in Indianapolis, personnel clerk. And there in Indianapolis, my buddies were African Americans. But when we'd go downtown, they were not allowed to go to certain restaurants or bars. I mean, it was discrimination. Okay, so I come back to California, and then I got assigned to Fort Hood, Texas. I'm 18 years old then. Or 18. And I'm reporting to Fort Hood, Texas. I end up in Temple. So I get off the Greyhound Depot, and I said, I actually wanted to leave Pomona early, and I said, I'm going to go down close to Fort Hood, Texas, near Nilkaling, Texas, and I'll go party the night before. So I went there and got off the bus and checked into a hotel, and then I go to a restaurant. When I sit in the restaurant, the waitress comes and throws a reserve sign on my table. So then I get up and I go to another table, and she picks up the same sign and puts a reserve sign on that table. She did it 3 times. So no se me prendía el foco. You know, I'm 18 years old from California. I have not experienced this. She says that if I wanted to eat in the restaurant, I have to go around the back. And so it scared me. So I go back to the hotel, and I said, I'm getting out of Dodge. I'm going to report early to Fort Hood, Texas. So I got my duffel bag. I'll go back to the bus station, and there's a big line outside the depot. So I get in line, and it's not moving. So I lean over, and I can see inside the bus depot it's empty. So I lean back. The line is not moving. And I said, man, what is going on? So finally, I just get my duffel bag, and I go inside the bus depot. And that's when I realized that blacks are not allowed into the bus depot. So I was standing outside on the line with blacks, and which I did not know. And that's when I noticed, too, at the bus depot, that they had 2 drinking fountains, one for blacks and one for whites. And it was an incredible experience. I mean, it really scared the heck out of me. I couldn't wait to get out of the town and get to Fort Hood, Texas. So it was a weird experience for me.
And what town was this in?
It was Temple, on the way to Killeen and into Fort Hood.
So what did you make of that? Because in California, you didn't see the same thing.
Not outright. I mean, it was more subtle in California than get hit by a 2x4 in Texas. No, it scared me. So I went and reported back to Texas, and it was funny because once I got into it was a Hell on Wheels, 2nd Armored Division. Then our company had 2 times for serving food, one for whites and one for blacks. And depending on what time I got off of my job and on the base, I would either go to eat with the whites or I'd go with the blacks. So I would go either way. I didn't understand the outright hatred towards African Americans, and again, that served to shape my advocacy work, my values. That someday I was going to work to try to remedy and stop that hatred.
So when you see a water fountain that says whites and one that says colored or blacks, which one was you?
It didn't make a difference to me. It really didn't. Like I said to you, there was 2 times for blacks to eat in our base, and so I would go either way. But hang out with blacks, hang out with whites.
Did you meet other Latinos in the military?
Oh, absolutely. That's our clique. We had Tejanos, Puerto Ricans. And we would all hang around together. We'd listen to our music. We'd go out and find our food. That was our support network.
So what kind of music was it that you listened to?
Well, that's right. I was exposed to Tejano music.
Some people say it's the best kind.
It was the best kind at that time. We didn't have that kind of music in California. We had mariachis in California, but that's not Tejano music. As I mentioned to you earlier, the band I listened to most at that time was Sunny and the Sun Glows. There used to be a big auditorium in downtown Austin, and all the Chicanos and the base would carpool all the way to Austin from Fort Hood, Texas. We'd make reservations at the Hilton downtown, and then we'd go to the dance, and then the next day we'd go back to base.
I kind of find out what the name of that place was.
There was a big auditorium arena in downtown Austin.
I'll find out. So you had been outside of California. So you go to Okinawa. Had that been the first time? Had you gone to Mexico before?
Pardon me?
Had you visited Mexico growing up?
Oh no, just other than Ensenada and Rosarito and those areas here in Baja, but no.
So what kind of expectations did you have in Okinawa before you went there?
I was just being assigned there. I didn't have any expectations. The Okinawans at that time were very visible in demonstrating that they wanted the Americans to leave. They didn't want to be a part of Japan either. And but the 2 years or 17 months that I was there, most of the time in the weekends I saw demonstrations and against the American presence there. Okinawa is only about 12 miles wide, 27, 28 miles long. You had Marines, you had the Navy, you had the Air Force, the Army, the paratroopers. I mean, it was a pretty packed island. And so their demonstrations and their positions, I guess the USA was very, against the USA were very, very visible.
So did you understand why they were reluctant to have the U.S. there?
No, not at that time. But you had a lot of people, a lot of the friends there that agreed with them, but it wasn't for the same reasons that they did. They just wanted to come back home. But no, I didn't understand fully. At that time, we were preparing for Vietnam. Most of the training we did was jungle training. The language that we took was French. So they had us pretty occupied, except when we got our 3-day or 2-day passes to go out.
So, did you visit other countries besides Okinawa?
I wouldn't say visited, but we did jump on Taiwan. We jumped in the Philippines. All this were part of the war games and preparations. We jumped in Iriamote, which was another island. So, but these were not visitation to go sightseeing.
Right. So, what were you all thinking about, the soldiers? What were you all thinking about was going on in Vietnam and U.S. involvement there? What is y'all's understanding of that?
Well, we didn't understand. Actually, it was in 64, 65. The only troops in Vietnam were the Green Berets. There was no big military organization in there. The 173rd Airborne was the first organization to go into Vietnam. It was the only organization or brigade that jumped into Vietnam. Followed by us, the brigade division was the 4th Marine Division. So prior in 64, 65 was mostly advisors in Vietnam. We had offers at that time. We volunteered to go to Vietnam that we could join with the Special Forces. Now, to be a Special Forces member, it's really a difficult thing to do because you need 3 years of training, language training, all kinds. But we were offered the Green Beret if we would volunteer to go. Of course, I did volunteer. I left Okinawa 2 weeks before our organization. Actually, no, they deployed within, I think, 3 or 4 days after I left.
They deployed to Vietnam.
Deployed to Vietnam.
So, you didn't have an interest in becoming a beret?
No, I didn't have. I wanted to come home by that time. I didn't have any interest in becoming a career, making a career in the service, and it was time for me to.
Were there things about the military that didn't feel jived with what you wanted to do?
Well, I wouldn't say it was the best part of my life. I wouldn't say that I enjoyed the days. But I would say this about the military, that without their assistance, I would have never gone to college. I would have never been able to buy my first home. And so there was there was some good and there was some bad.
So
At that time, there was not the respect of the military that we have now. At that time, you'd walk down the airport with your uniform on, you're not going to get "thank you for your service." At that time, there was a lot of anti-war feelings. So the military was the last group of people you wanted to identify with.
So you served in Okinawa for what period?
17 months.
17 months, and then you get discharged there?
I get discharged.
You come back to California?
I come back to California. I work in construction for a year or two, and then that's when I started Mount Sac. I got out of the service before I was 21. And then I started college at 22.
So why did you wait for a little bit before you entered college? I know you were working in construction, but was there part of it that was just you getting ready mentally or something for it?
Well, I think the jobs that I got after the military were jobs that I was not happy with, that I wanted to make a career out of. They were all labor jobs, welding, construction, cement work, out there in the hot sun. I said, no, I've got to change my life. And so that's when I decided to enroll in machine shop at Mount Sac.
So how about your other buddies that were with you in the were supposed to be the buddy system? Did they end up going to college?
Yes, two of them did, of the four. Art Flores graduated. He went into Mount Sac, but he didn't go into machine shop. He went into drafting. Actually, two of them went into drafting. Two arts, Art Flores Pájaro and Art Castro. They both went in there. Castro got his teaching credential, and he retired as a principal in Alta Loma. And Art Flores became a probation officer, and he's retired.
And how about Julio Espinosa?
Pardon me?
Julio Espinosa?
Julio's is still there, retired, but no, he never went to school.
And Ernie Vallejo?
Ernie Vallejo died in a water skiing accident.
So you start going to
Mount Sac.
Mount Sac. So you go there and you start learning to be a machinist. Then you end up changing from that. And so was this as you were kind of going through? Were you kind of expanding your horizons? That's how you ended up going into different fields?
No, I was always an activist, even in high school, with my organization. But there was very few people of my background and color in college. I mean, come on, you're talking about 65, 66, 1965, 66. Most of the time, I was the one and only person of color in class. So I was pretty lonely, you know. Art had they had their own schedule, so we hardly met in school. They had their own classes. But I'm sure that they went through the same experience in the classes they had to take. We had to take, besides our vocational courses, we had to take our GE courses, you know, the English, the speech, and all that kind of stuff. And oftentimes I was the only person of color in there. And that happened all the way through, even when I transferred over to a 4-year college at Long Beach. As a matter of fact, at Cal State Long Beach, oftentimes I'd walk by the bookstore and there would be a person of brown color sitting there in front of the bookstore. And every time I'd go by, I'd give him the old Chicano nod, and he would return it. And that went on for a few weeks, and finally he stopped me and he says, "Are you Mexican?" And no. And I said, yes, I am a Mexican. He said, "For a long time I thought you were Arabic, because there was so few of us on campus, so few of us." And with him, Hector, his name was Hector, so few of us in there that we started an organization called UMAS, the United Mexican American Student Association. And our goal then became to bring more people like us onto campus. Don't forget that I was, by that time, I was, 23? 24? And I was one of the youngest. Because the other people, like Hector, they were older than me. Because they had gone through the similar experiences I had.
So is Hector a student?
But yeah, Hector was a student.
What is his last name?
Hector Camacho Rosales. I can't recall.
So UMAS, there was another organization. This was like a chapter of a larger organization?
The United Mexican American Student Association, yes, was founded. I don't know where it was founded, but there were chapters on it at UCLA, Cal State LA. There were chapters all over in Southern California. Later, we came together. We used to meet locally in Los Angeles. We called it UMAS Central. And then we found that there were organizations in Arizona, in Texas, Colorado. Jorge Gonzalez came out with a poem, "I Am Joaquin," in Colorado, and he called for a conference of student organizations. And we went there. And that's when the name Mecha started to come out, this poet from San Diego State, Alorista. But we came back from that, and then there was a meeting in Santa Barbara, and that's where the Plan de Santa Barbara was initiated, and that's when the name Mecha came out, Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano Zetzlan. And I became the chair of the organization there at Cal State Long Beach.
So, not so long ago, there were people that were calling Mecha very radical, almost saying there was a communist organization. I know people that were in Mecha would say it wasn't all that. Can you tell me a little bit about what that Mecha was for you?
Well, it was developed during the time of the student movement here in the country. It was the age of the Black Panthers, the Students for a Democratic Society, the Black Student Union, and of course Mecha. Now, as Mechistas, all we wanted to do was we wanted a piece of the American pie. No way did we have any goals or objectives to be revolutionary. We wanted access to higher education. We knew that education was transformative. We knew that with education, we could get our family members and people from the barrios out of there. We wanted them to have a good life. And so that was our organization. Somewhere along the line, I don't know, they started attaching us to communism. I know certain statewide people in California lost elections because they were associated with Mecha. But Mecha was never intended to undermine the American way. We wanted to be a part of it. We were being kept out. So yes, we were assertive and sometimes we would knock down doors. Sometimes we would have sit-ins and demonstrations. But that was because we wanted access to the American dream. And so that was the only strategies that we had at our disposal. Nobody wanted to demonstrate. Nobody wanted to boycott. That was our last resort. But if we couldn't communicate our goals, and if we couldn't get the college, university administrations to accept what we wanted to do, to provide more opportunities, then we would have to use alternative means. And that's what created the demonstrations, and maybe that's why they labeled us. But you don't have any machistas in this country who do not feel that this country is the best in the world. We wanted to become part of it.
So, sorry, how would you distinguish between UMAS and Mecha?
There's no distinction. It's the same group of students. The name just changed. The Mecha changed to incorporate this concept of Atzlan, which is an Aztec reference to the southern part of the northern part of Mexico, which is the Southern California area. And so if there was any debate between UMAS and Mecha, where was the capital of Atzlan? But it was to encompass all the student organizations across the Southwest, because the student movement became national. It wasn't just Southern California. It was Northern California, Central California, California. It was Arizona, Colorado, even Utah, Texas, New Mexico. So it became a great movement, and we used to communicate with the various chapters. We knew what was going on in Texas. We knew what was going on in Arizona.
How would you communicate?
Either by phone or we'd travel, caravan.
Were there newsletters that you read?
Pardon me?
Did they have newsletters that people would
No, we had phone connections.
Yeah. So there wasn't like a printed...
No. We had some newspapers. But most of the time it was by phone calls. Once we met in Colorado with Crusade for Justice under Corte, that's where all the Southwest or national organization came to being, and everybody exchanged phone numbers and addresses and names, and And that was it.
So, was there a certain amount of consciousness raising as you became more involved with Mecha?
Yes. Most of it's self, education. We talked about the way we were treated. We talked about our experiences and how we were treated coming up. We would talk about opportunities and who made it and who has it and why. So it was all self-instruction. There were very few role models. But, eventually we found Julian Zamora's. We found Reyes Tejerina. Of course, Cesar Chavez was our idol. Ernesto Galarza. Rudy Acuña was occupied Mexico.
America.
Occupied America. We finally began to get literature into our hands. And that helped to reinforce what we were feeling inside.
So it was it sounds like one of the difficulties was that there wasn't that much literature.
Not at that time, no.
So did some of the members of Mecha start to produce the literature?
We used to write a lot, poems mostly. Then we had the Raul from Northridge came out with La Raza newspaper. There were some other newsletters that finally came out that people would print and publish their stories. And then we had we had some, one of these days what would be good is to publish some of the speeches that we had. I remember a few speeches. I remember a speech that had an impact on me by Phil Montes. Will the real Mexican Americans stand up? There's another speech that was done by Professor. The only PhDer at that time that we recall was Joe Platt with a PhD. But there was another gentleman there that his name was Manuel Guerra. The hamburger versus a taco, which in that speech provided the conflict of cultures. And he captured the way we feel. Are we Mexican or are we American? And so he captured the conflict that's between us and the bouncing around that we used to go. Later on, UCLA came out with a project authored by Manuel Ramirez. It was a Mexican-American Studies programs, and it outlined demographic data. It reported on the demographics of higher education, the Latino representation. And that served as a foundation for us. We also had a friendly legislator up in Sacramento, Vasconcelos, who was very outspoken and provided us with a lot of material and print material for us to review. And so there's a lot of people that came along after the beginning of the organizations that helped shape the student movement.
So when you say
that's how Chicano Studies. Look, from the student movement, Chicano Studies was created. Okay, programs such as EOP, Student Support Services, student. Learning Skills Centers, students. So a lot of the concepts that you hear and know now that you take for granted were started by students. So that's a part of history that I think is not well known, because everybody talks about the peer counseling programs. They talked about the learning skills centers. And all that was initiated by students. We thought, actually, we felt that we needed in order to survive. It worked for us, and now it's mainstreamed. And the roots of the services, someone needs to report those.
Were there a lot of veterans in Mecha?
Yes, a lot of veterans. I don't think I met. We were all veterans, as a matter of fact,
Why do you suppose that is?
because we went straight through the military after high school.
But there was other Mexican American people, college students.
Not very few of us.
Oh, so it was more because that was the population. of
The
students.
population that started the Mecha and the UMAS were very few, handful. All veterans,
And that's because they had access to higher education.
because through the GI Bill. Yep. Now later on, we got students. As the years went by, and access was provided. Then you have more diversity. You have more students from parochial schools. You have people coming straight from the East LA schools. I mean, we created a lot of opportunity and access. Those few individuals that started with the Mecha and UMAS were the pioneers. And now, I don't even know if anyone knows the history of those days. But there were a lot of veterans, absolutely.
So what did your parents think about your involvement? Did you ever talk to them about it?
They knew, but, my dad was very, very proud that I would speak up. They were surprised. I think they were proud that I was speaking up and being a voice for Latinos.
In what way did you speak up?
Well, and the way that I spoke up is, how about financial aid for Latino students? How about not talking about access, but give us some money so we can go recruit Latino students? What about establishing Chicano Studies for a way for us to understand ourselves more? So those have been the voices, my voice, throughout the year. Scholarship money. I still continue to do that.
So the point about Chicano Studies, why was that so important for you all?
Because at that time, as I mentioned earlier, growing up in California, you didn't know what you were. Were you Mexican or non-Mexican? Because you lived in two cultures. You were not proficient enough in Spanish to go to Mexico, and the people in Mexico would refer to you as pocho. You weren't proficient enough in English. You would call a beaner or a wetback. So you lived in the middle. So what's our history? Tell us about our history. Why should we be self-confident? So you get Chicano Studies and they say, look at your ancestors. Look where you came from. Look what they struggled with, and look what they became. You're a proud people. So that's why it was important to have ethnic studies, Chicano Studies, because it gave us a strong foundation for us for what we wanted to become.
Okay. So you go to Mount Sac, and then you go to Santa Ana College. At Santa Ana College, tell me again, I know you told me, but what was your major there?
Machine technology.
Machine technology, okay. And then you go straight from there to Cal State Long Beach.
Yes.
And your major there was?
In industrial arts.
Okay.
I wanted to become a woodshop teacher. My BA degree is in industrial arts.
Okay. And then?
My dream, after I learned to love education, after Mr. Clark helped me out at Mount Sac, I loved education. And it came easier for me. And my grades just jumped up. I had more confidence in myself. So I went to Cal State Long Beach. I'm still in industrial arts because I had already done 2 years in the community college. But my goal of becoming a lawyer was reawakened while I was at the Long Beach because of the student movement. But because my involvement, my activities, I changed my goal again. I actually applied to Loyola Law School and I was accepted. But I had a change of direction, and then I just went and earned my master's and doctorate degree at USC. And so, as I told Mr. Braza, here you have a guy that just got out of high school with D average, C average, to a doctorate degree from USC.
But there's 9 years between the time that you got your bachelor's from Cal State Long Beach, right, and the time that you went into USC.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do in those 9 years?
I worked there at USC as a director of El Centro Chicano. I started school part-time. I couldn't give up. I was taking one class a semester because I was married with 2 children. And so it was one class a semester, little by little. And eventually I found out that my wife would kill you if I tell you the story, but I'm going to say it. Eventually I realized I only had 12 more units to go with my doctorate degree. So I asked my wife, I says, if I quit and if you go to work, I can finish my doctorate degree quicker and we can get a better job. So she agreed. So I took her to the LA Times to apply for a part-time job because she still had the 2 kids. So I'm out in the parking lot and she goes in to take a typing test for the job. She comes back and she tells me she didn't pass it. I said, how can you not pass a typing test? So I go inside the personnel office. I take the typing test and I pass it because I knew how to type. So I got the job. So I used to work to the LA Times from 6:30 in the morning till 11:30. Then I'd go straight to USC and take my classes for my doctorate degree. So it's a long journey. I mean, we had, when I went to USC and I finally quit and I went to graduate school, the time that I went there on a full-time basis was an incredible experience for me. Incredible. And so I said to myself, now I know how the rich people can enjoy school because I had time to read all my textbooks. I had time to prepare my research papers and think about them and read them. Because before then, I would rush into class, take me a half hour to unwind, the class is over, and I don't have no notes. But when you go full-time, and you don't have to worry about finances and that you're concentrating on education, what a difference it makes. And more love for education because you get into, not only get into your textbook, but you read related textbooks. So you really become an expert because you review all the literature that exists. The doctoral program at UC was truly enjoyable for me. So afterwards.
But you were going to school, you're working part-time as a typist at the LA Times?
Yes, but all I'm answering is the phone calls. There's no, I don't have to think about the job once I left. There's no take-home work or anything like that. It's, did you get your paper? Is it wet, not wet? Yeah, I'll send you another one. And that was it.
So your wife ended up being...
Taking care of the kids.
Okay. So you're still working, though?
I'm still working. Afterwards. After I finished, she decided to go full-time. And she got her master's, administrative credential, and teacher credential. So she taught for almost 30 years.
So you go to USC. Why USC?
Because I was working there.
Oh, I see. So you got the job at the Chicano?
I got the job first as director of Centro Chicano. Tuition was at 50% off. And the School of Education was there. And so I started. One class at a time.
So what did you do at the Center for Chicano?
The same thing. The director of the Centro Chicano, when I got hired at USC, the vice president says, I want you to bring me 100, we have 100 slots, I want you to bring 100 Latino students. 100? I said, I can bring you 200. But I'm being naive. And so once I start working there, trying to recruit students, I learned real quickly that I didn't control the admission criteria. So I just couldn't go walk out in the street and recruit a high school student because they had to meet the admission criteria. Second, I didn't control the financial aid. So I couldn't go out there and say, come in and pay your tuition at USC. It's a private university. How can they afford it? So I learned that I had to negotiate and develop partnerships and collaborate. And before you know it, we were reaching our 100 students. USC has a large Latino student population now. At Centro Chicano, it was the first director in 1973. At Centro Chicano is still alive and doing well, and it still plays a major role in the life of Latino students on campus. So I was its first director. I was there maybe 4 or 5 years. I always had the knack of writing grants, and I was always able to bring in money. I always wrote grants. So we did revenue sharing. We did all kinds of things at USC.
So you graduated from USC in 1989, and did you stay at you were no longer at the Centro Chicano?
No, I left at Centro Chicano to go full-time for my doctoral program. And after that, while I was going to school, when I finished all the coursework, the College of Education asked me to serve as an assistant to the Dean of the College of Education. So I went back to work there at USC on a full-time basis while I worked on my dissertation. It took me 5 years to finish my dissertation, mostly because I went back to work again. The plan was to finish my dissertation within a year after my coursework. Because when I finished my coursework, I had already had my first chapter, and I was already almost through my second chapter, which was the review of literature. So all I need to do now is get my research methodology, send it out, get the data, and then do the data analysis and the conclusion. But once I started work, forget it. And so and you only have 5 years to finish your dissertation. So I finished it just in time, because if you don't finish it within those 5 years, you have to start all over again. So that's what happened. I was at Cal State Fullerton by then. So after at USC, I went to the School of Education. I went to Cal State Fullerton. The vice president there, who hired me, says, "How much longer do you have to finish your dissertation?" I said, "I've got my data. I've got everything. I just need some peace and quiet for a couple of weeks to write it, the conclusion." He says, "Tell your staff to report to me for the next 3 weeks. You go finish your dissertation." And that's what happened. I finished it.
That's great.
That was another guy that helped me out.
What is his name?
Coleman, Jack Coleman. He was the academic vice president at the time, and he hired me as a director of student. He hired me as a director of student academic services and university outreach at Fullerton. And my goal there was to stay there for just 5 years and then move on. I didn't want to get stagnated like I did at USC. I ended up staying at Fullerton for 27 years. And I ended up being the vice president for student affairs, the acting vice president for student affairs.
And that's the job that you retired from.
And that's the job that I retired from.
So along the way, is this what you wanted to be doing? Was this your dream job?
Yes, it is my dream job. As I keep going back to, is that without education, I just don't see how we can improve on our lives, how we can be analytical, how we can make decisions based on fact and information, how to analyze fact, how to tell the truth, which is important in current times. So without education, I don't see how we as a community can transform our life. And what's happening in California, it's incredible. Over 40% of the student body now in the California State University system are Latino. I think of our 23 campuses, I think 17 are Hispanic serving institutions. Cal State Fullerton, the campus that I started, which had a measly maybe 1,500 Latino students when I started. Now over 40% of their students are Hispanic. Over 50% of the incoming freshmen this past year were Hispanic. Cal State Fullerton had 15,000, 18,000 students when I started. Now they have 42,000 students. It's incredible the progress that we made. The job is not finished yet.
What still needs to be done?
What still needs to be done, and education, I'm just talking about education, is the faculty has to reflect our student demographics. Our educational leadership has to reflect our student demographics. And we need to have people that get engaged with all the communities, including the Latino community. So we need those kind of people working. If we're talking about the future of California, the future workforce of California, it's going to be Latino. So if the Latinos are underprepared, California is going to have a hard time maintaining its status. So we need to focus on educating the workforce. Already over 50% of the kindergarten children in California are Latino. 12 years from now, they'll be going into college. I'm kind of selfish about this because I enjoy retirement. I love retirement. I need people to contribute to my Social Security. So the higher wages, the more they contribute. And so we need to find a way to reach all our people.
What do you think are the barriers right now?
The barriers for our students are still the secondary schools. A lot of our schools don't have a college-going culture, so we still struggle with that. My goal has always been for a high school student. College isn't for everybody. I know that. But my goal has always been for a high school student to have the choice whether they want to go to college or they want to go in the military or they want to go in the workforce. What I don't accept is a student coming out of high school and saying, you're not good enough for college. You don't have any other option because you're not prepared. And then I blame the high schools for it. So I think we need to deal with the secondary schools. We need to get highly prepared teachers, highly motivated teachers. We need to create those educational pipelines still to higher education. And we need to diversify the faculty ranks in our colleges and universities. So that's still a threat. The cost of higher education continues to increase. It's getting out of reach for some of our students, or some of our families. The path for undocumented students is another issue and concern. So we still have work to do. We have to we have to stabilize the financing of higher education. We need to increase the number of diverse faculty, and we need to work in collaboration and partnership with our secondary partners.
So one of the, we talked about Chicano Studies earlier, and if the population of Mexican American or Latino kids coming up is not educated about the role of Latinos, that could end up being that they may not feel a connection to the immigrant kids coming over. So what are the solutions for that?
You see that already. You see a gap between the student leaders at the time and the incoming students who think they've made it on their own. Every chance I have to talk to students, I say, yes, you've had a significant role in getting to where you're at now, but your parents and family helped along the way. They have been the support network for you. You also have to accept that there has been a lot of people who have come before you, who have opened the doors for you. And so I try to educate the students on that because there's not enough of that going. There's a big gap between that knowledge that of the events that happened before they got to where they're at, and I think we're losing some of that inspiration and motivation by our students. Jessica might think it's important that we diversify the faculty. I think we need to look at not only Chicano studies, but the role of ethnic studies and how we mainstream them, not keeping them apart in their own departments. You're not going to get a lot of students majoring in ethnic studies. The fear there is, what kind of job am I going to get? So how do you mainstream the values of these courses so that all students are exposed to it? So that's one area that I think we need to focus on as well.
Is anybody working on that right now?
Well, there are few of us that bring that notion up, and we continue to struggle with it, but we still got a long ways to go. It's a work in progress.
So you got married in what year?
69.
69. So what role did that play in you, if any, in you getting more degrees and shaping you into who you are today?
I'm pretty lucky. I married an exceptional woman, a beautiful woman, who has been in my side, or we've been on each other's sides all along. When I met her, it was 68. Got married in 69. We've traveled this journey together.
Do you have anything you want to add?
Let me get some water. We've been married 49 years. Being married that long, you have hills and lows, or highs and lows. But she's been Ay, que no me hagas llorar.
I've heard all kinds of good things about her.
Yeah, she's incredible.
And I do, from lots of different interviews, the role, the relationship that you have, it can oftentimes be what really
Hmm.
helped you form the foundation to do all kinds of good stuff. So that's fine.
Yeah, she has been incredible, a partner in life throughout my career. And there's a lot of similarities, and that we both believe in what we're doing. We're both strong advocates. We believe that parents play an important role in a child's life. And so we're very engaged in our own families. And so she is an extremely, to be married to me, you have to be strong. And she's one strong lady. Let me just put it that way.
So tell us about working as a trustee at Cal State, because that must give you a completely different view than you had before.
Well, as a trustee, I represent and I speak for all 23 campuses. I continue to be a voice for students. The things that we still need to accomplish as far as access and diversity, and those are the things that I work on now on a system-wide level. The California State University system is an incredible higher education organization. If it wasn't for that system, a lot of individuals, and particularly minority students, would never have had the opportunity to pursue higher education. They are the public institution. They are the people's university. And my experience at the CSU and at my alma mater, Cal State Long Beach, made a big difference in our life and the life of my wife. That's where we met, at Cal State Long Beach. So as a trustee, I have a great respect for the CSU. And so when I speak on behalf of students, it's because I want CSU to continue to be great. I want the CSU to continue to be the people's university. I think the CSU has a tremendous impact on the economy of the state of California. And so my role as a trustee, I take it very seriously, and it's very important to me. And so I want to be a very good trustee, so I make sure that I do my homework and I read all the material that is sent to me, and that when I get in discussions, that they're well informed, that I'm well informed on the topic. So being a trustee, I think, is an honor and a privilege, and I hope that I serve my remaining time with some distinction.
Are there things that you've learned as a trustee that you wish you had known as an administrator?
Let me see. What can I say? There's 20 of us. Each one of the trustees is an incredible individual. They value higher education. They know the role that higher education plays in our society. Very intelligent. What have I learned? Well, I learn every meeting. I learn something, whether it's on budgeting of higher education, financing of higher education, whether it's ideas to close the achievement gap, whether it's how we serve veterans. So there's a lot of things that we learn. But I also bring a lot to the table because I've been in the system for 27 years. And so I think I'm in a position to make contributions to the board.
So one last question for me. You talked early on about, as you became involved in UMass and then later Mecha, that what people wanted was to become part of the mainstream. It seems like you've been able to accomplish that. You're part of the mainstream. Are there things that you feel that other people who aren't within the mainstream can accomplish that maybe others can't? From working inside the system as opposed to working outside the system, do you think that there's, working outside the system, there's some things that can be accomplished that maybe not inside?
Well, there's a simple answer to that is if you're outside the system, the CSU is taxpayer supported. So the public can weigh in on the issues of the CSU at any point. So you can influence the direction of the CSU as if you're engaged in as an individual, as a private citizen. Yeah, you can make a big difference. But I find it more effective if you're inside. And the only reason why you would be more effective is because you're able to give voice to a certain perspective. And so you're able to shape some of the debate, shape some of the discussion, if you're inside. And so I consider that to be vital and important in helping decide the future direction of the CSU.
Well, Si, do you have any questions? Is there anything I haven't asked?
You covered it.
Are there any points or anything you'd like to add that I haven't asked you?
No, just going back to my wife, I think she's an exceptional person. And I apologize for tearing up.
Nothing to apologize for. It's the human dimension. And I appreciate it. Thank
You're
you so
welcome.
much. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.